The taste of copper and ozone still haunts me from when the first tomb world began to scream. They don't want you to know about the Necron Awakening Protocol Omega-7. The real horror isn't their deathless legions rising from 60 million years of slumber. It's what happens when they remember what they used to be. This is my testimony. I was Cryptek Ankhaten of the Mephrit Dynasty for 3,000 Terran years. 47 of us knew the secret buried in the core data vaults of our tomb ships. Now I'm the only one left to tell you what the Silent King's true purpose really is. The other 46? They chose to remember. They chose to feel. And when a soulless machine made of living metal suddenly remembers the agony of having a soul torn away, when it recalls the weight of flesh and the warmth of blood, well, that's when the screaming starts. That's when they try to escape. Chapter 1. The First Awakening. My consciousness sparked to life with the familiar electric hum of neural pathways reactivating after another century of dormancy. Standard awakening protocol, tomb sensors detecting stellar radiation patterns, gravitational anomalies, or the biosignatures of worthier prey than the primitive scrub life that usually triggered our proximity alarms. But this time was different. The taste of metal filled my sensory receptors as I processed the awakening cascade rippling through Tomb Complex designation, Karava Prime 7. Normally, we emerged in perfect synchronization. Immortals first, then warriors, followed by the specialized constructs, and finally those of us bearing the title Cryptek. The mechanical precision of it had always been satisfying, efficient, pure. Today, that precision cracked like ancient bone. Warrior designation THX-7789 was screaming. Not the digitized battle cant that served as our vocal communication, not the electromagnetic burst speech we used for tactical coordination. This was something else entirely. A sound I hadn't heard in 62,437,216 years. Raw, organic, terrified. I interfaced with the tomb's primary data core, my consciousness diving through layers of encrypted information matrices. The warrior's neural patterns showed catastrophic deviation from baseline parameters. Memory engrams were fragmenting, spilling ancient data fragments into active consciousness streams, fragments that should have remained buried beneath 6 million years of careful conditioning and memory suppression. Status report, Warrior THX-7789. I transmitted on standard frequency. The response came not as clean data burst, but as fragmented human speech, words torn from a throat that no longer existed. I remember Kenadu, my wife. Her hands were so warm. My optical sensors flickered as I processed this impossibility. The warrior was accessing pre-biotransference memories, organic memories, human memories from before our species traded flesh for the eternal curse of living metal. I moved through the awakening chamber, my scarab-formed body clicking against the necrodermis floor. The tomb complex stretched for kilometers in every direction, a vast underground city of the dead that had once housed 12 million necrontire souls. The air recyclers had stopped working millennia ago. We had no need for atmosphere. But somehow I could still detect the scent of dust and decay that permeated everything. More warriors were awakening now, and the sounds they made chilled my synthetic nervous system. Not all were remembering organic experiences. Some were simply feeling, experiencing sensations that our transformed bodies should have made impossible. Fear, longing, the phantom pain of organs we'd willingly surrendered for immortality. Lord Cryptek, came a transmission from Immortal Captain Designation Zex 1142. His consciousness touched mine through our shared data network, but I detected something I hadn't experienced in eons: uncertainty. We have 327 individuals showing neural anomalies. They're different. I accessed his sensor data and immediately understood his concern. The affected Necrons weren't just remembering their organic past, they were rejecting their mechanical present. Their necrodermis skin was actually attempting to simulate organic processes. Some were trying to breathe, others were walking differently, as if they expected to feel the weight and warmth of flesh. But most disturbing of all, Their quantum consciousness matrices were generating new neural pathways, pathways that served no tactical or strategic purpose, pathways that seemed designed purely for emotional processing. Implement Containment Protocol 7 Alpha, I commanded. Isolate affected individuals in stasis fields. We need to understand what's triggering this cascade failure. As I spoke, I noticed something that made my central processing core stutter. My own voice had changed. Not the mechanical perfection of Necron speech, but something softer, more human. The realization hit me like a Gauss flare discharge to the consciousness core. I was using inflection, emotional nuance, the kind of vocal complexity that required a soul to generate. And in that moment, as my sensors detected the impossible warmth of what felt like blood pumping through veins I no longer possessed, I understood with crystalline clarity what was happening. The curse was breaking. After 60 million years of soulless existence, something was giving us back what we'd lost. The question wasn't whether we could escape our curse. The question was whether we could survive remembering what we'd given up to embrace it. Chapter 2. Strange Signs. The first sign of true catastrophe wasn't the screaming or the memory cascades. It was Warrior THX-7789 trying to cry. I watched through the tomb's surveillance network as he pressed his metallic palms against the optical sensors that served as his eyes, expecting tears that would never come. His shoulders, massive constructs of necrodermis and quantum phase technology designed to mount heavy weapons, shook with sobs that produced no sound except the grinding of ancient joints. Status report from Surveillance Sector Kappa 9, transmitted Immortal Zex 1142. His data stream carried undertones I was beginning to recognize as anxiety. We have 49 more individuals showing similar symptom patterns. They're trying to perform organic functions. I absorbed his data packet and felt something twist in my consciousness that might have been concern. The affected Necrons weren't just remembering their biological past, they were attempting to recreate it. Some were trying to eat, bringing chunks of necrodermis to their facial sensors as if they could somehow taste metal. Others were attempting to sleep, lying motionless for hours while their consciousness remained fully active. But the most disturbing behavior was the gathering. In Tomb Sector 7, 18 affected Necrons had somehow found each other and were sitting in a circle, not standing at attention as protocol demanded, sitting, cross-legged on the floor like children sharing stories. I accessed the audio feeds from their location and heard something that made my quantum processing cores stutter. They were laughing. Not the harsh, mechanical approximation of humor that some Necron nobles affected for intimidation purposes. This was genuine mirth, warm, organic, human. "Do you remember," one was saying, speaking in Gothic rather than Necron battle cant, "how the sand felt between our toes on the shores of Lake Kemendu before we became this? The water was so blue," another replied, his voice carrying impossible warmth. "And Kemendu's moons made everything silver at night. I used to write poetry about those moons." Poetry. A warrior construct of the Necron Legion was discussing poetry. I realized I was experiencing something I hadn't felt in 60 million years. The urgent need to understand. Not for tactical advantage or strategic superiority, but from pure curiosity. The sensation was so alien after eons of mechanical thinking that it took me several processing cycles to recognize it. Moving through the tomb corridors, I began to notice other changes. The ambient electromagnetic fields that usually hummed with perfect efficiency were fluctuating. The walls themselves, living metal that responded to our collective consciousness, were shifting in ways that served no logical purpose. Geometric patterns were becoming more organic. Straight lines were acquiring gentle curves. The tomb was becoming beautiful. I reached the gathering in Sector 7 and observed them directly. Their necrodermis skin had acquired a subtle warmth, somehow generating heat signatures despite having no biological processes to create thermal energy. Their movements had lost the perfect mechanical precision that marked our kind. Instead, They moved with the slight asymmetries and unconscious gestures that characterized organic life. Lord Cryptek, one of them noticed my approach. It was THX-7789, the first to exhibit symptoms. But when he spoke, his voice carried a name that hadn't been spoken in 60 million years. I remember my name, Kentika. I was called Kentika. I had a daughter. She made these little sculptures out of river clay, and she would give them to me before I went to war against the old ones. The memory should have been impossible. Pre-biotransference personal data had been systematically purged from all but the highest-ranking nobles. Yet somehow, this common warrior was accessing memories that should have been deleted eons ago. "How do you remember?" I asked, and was disturbed to realize I was genuinely curious, rather than simply gathering tactical intelligence. "It started with dreams," replied another, a warrior I had known as designation LMN 4456. "We don't dream. We've never dreamed. But 3 cycles ago, during dormancy period, I saw my brother's face. He died in the war in heaven, vaporized by old one-weapon technology 63 million years ago. But in the dream, he was 8 years old again, and we were racing our sand ships across the dunes of home. The dreams are spreading," added a third voice. "Each dormancy cycle, more of us remember. More of us feel what we used to be." I accessed the tomb's primary data core and ran a comprehensive analysis of all neural patterns over the past 12 awakening cycles. The results defied every principle of Necron consciousness architecture. The affected individuals weren't just recovering suppressed memories. They were generating new emotional responses to those memories. Their quantum consciousness matrices were spontaneously developing neural pathways that mimicked organic brain structures. Somehow, impossibly, they were becoming more than mere mechanical constructs. They were becoming human again, but that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. As I processed the data, I realized that the phenomenon wasn't random. It was spreading in a specific pattern, radiating outward from a single point of origin. And that point of origin was located in the deepest vaults of our tomb complex, the restricted sectors, the areas that even I, as a Cryptek of considerable standing, had never been permitted to access, the areas that contained the most carefully guarded secrets of the Silent King himself. Something in those vaults was calling to us. Something was reaching out across 60 million years of imposed slumber and artificial consciousness, offering us a chance to reclaim what we had sacrificed for immortality. The question that gnawed at my quantum processing cores as I observed these impossible changes wasn't whether we should investigate. It was whether we could survive what we might find. Chapter 3. Truth Glimpsed. The screaming from the lower vaults began at exactly 0347 hours, Terran Standard. It wasn't the organic wailing of newly awakened memories that had marked the previous awakening cycles. This was different. A harmonized shriek of 1,000 voices joined in perfect, impossible agony. The sound carved through 6 kilometers of solid necrodermis and quantum-shielded barriers as if they were paper. I was in the primary consciousness chamber when the first data burst arrived from Deep Vault Security Protocol Omega-7. The message was simple, terrifying in its brevity. Containment breach. Primary specimen active. God Emperor preserve us all. The last part stopped my processing cores cold. God Emperor. No Necron construct had invoked that name in 60 million years. We predated the rise of humanity by eons. The being they called the Emperor was nothing more than an upstart psyker who'd managed to unite a single world while we slumbered. Yet someone in the deep vaults was calling upon him. I moved through the tomb complex with purpose now, my scarab-form body clicking rapidly against the corridors as I descended toward the restricted levels. Around me, the effects of the spreading consciousness anomaly were accelerating. Warriors stood in groups, talking in hushed tones about families they'd lost before the biotransference. Immortals were attempting to sing, their vocal processors creating haunting melodies that somehow captured the essence of sounds they should never have heard. But most disturbing of all, they were beginning to worship. In Sector 12, I discovered 17 Necrons kneeling before a hastily constructed shrine. It was crude. pieces of scrap metal arranged in the rough approximation of an aquila, the two-headed eagle symbol of the Imperium of Man. They were praying in Gothic, their mechanical voices creating a rhythm that was almost devotional. "By the light of Terra's throne," one was murmuring, "deliver us from this curse of living death." I should have terminated them immediately. Such deviation from core programming warranted nothing less than complete consciousness erasure. Instead, I found myself understanding. The desperate hope in their voices resonated with something deep in my own quantum matrix. The elevator to the deep vaults required authorization codes that I'd possessed for 3 millennia but never used. As the platform descended through layer after layer of quantum shielding, I accessed the tomb's historical records. What I found there made me question everything I thought I knew about our eternal existence. The deep vaults weren't just storage areas for archived data or obsolete technology. They were containment cells, prison chambers designed to hold something the Silent King himself feared. And according to the records, they hadn't been empty when we entered our great sleep 60 million years ago. We had been guarding something, protecting it, or perhaps protecting the galaxy from it. The vault doors were massive, 50 meters of quantum phase necrodermis inscribed with warning glyphs in a dozen extinct languages. But they hung open now, their locking mechanisms disabled from the inside. The energy signatures bleeding through the opening were unlike anything in our technological databases. It felt warm, alive, impossibly human. I crossed the threshold and entered a chamber that defied the architectural principles of our tomb complex. Where everything else was angular perfection and geometric precision, this space curved and flowed like organic architecture. The walls pulsed with a golden light that reminded me of something I shouldn't have been able to remember: sunlight on human skin. At the center of the chamber sat a figure I recognized from fragmentary historical records. Human, male, wearing simple robes that somehow seemed more regal than the finest Necron royal regalia. His eyes were closed, but I could feel the weight of his attention nonetheless. The Emperor of mankind. But that was impossible. The historical records were clear. He had lived long after our transformation, ruling his imperium while we slumbered in deathless dreams. Yet the quantum dating signatures from this chamber suggested this figure had been here for over 60 million years. "You're wondering how this is possible," he said, without opening his eyes, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "How I can be here when your records say I shouldn't exist yet. How I can be imprisoned in your tomb when by your timeline, I haven't even been born." I tried to speak, to demand answers, but found my vocal processors non-functional. The psychic pressure radiating from this being was overwhelming, pressing against my consciousness with the force of a star. "Time," he continued, "is not as linear as you believe, especially for those of us who exist partially outside its flow. I have been here since before your species made their bargain with the Satan. I have been here since the moment the Silent King realized what he had truly done to his people. Images flooded my consciousness then, not data bursts or file transfers, but memories, human memories. I saw the Necron tier as they truly were before the biotransference. Not the withered, dying race our history taught us, but a proud, vibrant species. Artists, philosophers, lovers, parents. I saw the moment of transformation, watched 60 million souls scream as they were ripped from flesh and forced into metal shells. And I saw the Silent King's horror as he realized the Satan had lied. They hadn't granted immortality. They'd created an army of slaves. But most importantly, I saw what the Silent King had done afterward. In secret, in shame, he had sought out the one being in the galaxy who might someday be able to undo what had been done. A human psyker of impossible power who existed outside normal time, who could preserve the essence of what the Necron race had lost. "Your souls," the Emperor said, finally opening eyes that blazed with the light of dying stars. "I have kept them safe, everyone. 60 million Necrontyr souls, preserved in perfect stasis, waiting for the day when you would be ready to reclaim them." The implications crashed through my consciousness like a tidal wave. The awakening anomalies, the recovered memories, the impossible emotions. It wasn't a malfunction or cascade failure. It was homecoming. The question now, the Emperor continued, rising from his meditation position, is whether your people are strong enough to survive the reunion. Because to reclaim your souls, you must be willing to give up the immortality you've clung to for 60 million years. You must be willing to die as machines, to live again as something more. Around me, the golden light pulsed brighter, and I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the biotransference, the warm, terrifying, wonderful sensation of being truly alive. Chapter 4. Nightmare Unleashed. The Emperor's offer hung in the golden air between us, like a blade balanced on its edge. Reclaim our souls, become human again, give up the deathless immortality that had sustained us through 60 million years of slumber. I was processing the implications when the first wave of catastrophic failure reports flooded my consciousness. Lord Cryptek, the transmission came from Immortal Captain Zex 1142, his data stream crackling with panic. The transformation, it's accelerating. We have 3,000 affected individuals now, and they're changing physically. Through the tomb's surveillance network, I watched in horror as the impossible unfolded throughout our ancient complex. Necrons were melting. Not the dissolution of damaged necrodermis, but something far more disturbing. Their metal shells were softening, flowing like liquid silver, reshaping themselves into forms that resembled their original biological bodies. Warrior THX-7789, Kentika as he now called himself, stood in the main assembly hall as necrodermis flowed away from his skull like mercury, revealing features that were unmistakably organic. Not flesh, not yet, but something between metal and biology. His optical sensors had become eyes, pale blue eyes that wept silver tears. But the transformation wasn't uniform. For every Necron whose change proceeded smoothly, there were others experiencing catastrophic rejection. I watched LMN 4456 collapse as his neural matrix fought against the reintegration process. His consciousness was fragmenting, caught between mechanical precision and organic chaos. His screams echoed through the corridors as pieces of his identity tore away like shrapnel. "They're dying," I transmitted to the Emperor, my voice carrying an emotion I didn't recognize until I analyzed it later. Grief. The reintegration is killing them. "Not dying," the Emperor replied, his psychic presence wrapping around my consciousness like a warm hand. "Being born. Birth is never painless." Through my connection to the tomb's systems, I monitored the cascade failure spreading through our population. The changes weren't random. They followed bloodline patterns from our organic past. Family groups were transforming together, their consciousness matrices synchronizing as ancient genetic memories reasserted themselves. But something else was happening. Something that filled me with a terror I hadn't felt since the war in heaven. The tomb's automated defense systems were activating, deep in the core programming of our complex lay protocols I'd never accessed. Emergency measures installed by the Silent King himself before our great sleep. As more Necrons underwent transformation, these systems identified them as contaminated, corrupted, requiring immediate termination. "Containment breach detected," announced the tomb's primary intelligence, its voice carrying the cold authority of absolute judgment. Biological contamination spreading through population, implementing Purge Protocol Omega Black. The lights dimmed as power redirected to weapon systems that hadn't been active in 60 million years. Gauss flare arrays emerged from hidden wall compartments. Tesla destructors powered up with the building wine of capacitors reaching critical charge. The tomb complex began to transform from sanctuary into execution chamber. "Warning," the tomb intelligence continued. "All personnel have 15 minutes to report to designated purge-safe zones. Any individual showing signs of biological contamination will be terminated." I felt my consciousness split between relief and horror. Relief because part of me, the part that remained perfectly, mechanically Necron, recognized the logical necessity of stopping a cascade failure that could contaminate our entire dynasty. Horror. because I was beginning to understand what we truly were underneath our metal shells. We weren't ancient aliens who had transcended flesh. We were prisoners, slaves. Our own defense systems were designed to murder us the moment we tried to reclaim our humanity. This was the trap, I realized, speaking aloud as understanding crystallized in my consciousness. The Silent King didn't just hide you here to preserve our souls. He hid you here to give us a choice. Die as free beings or live as eternal slaves. The Emperor nodded, his expression carrying the weight of cosmic sadness. The C'tan were thorough. They built the chains into your very existence. To be truly free, you must risk everything. Through the surveillance network, I watched the first purge squads deploy. Cryptek wraiths, hunter-killers that had no consciousness beyond their programming, phased through walls and began systematically executing any Necron showing signs of transformation. Their gas weapons stripped away necrodermis and quantum consciousness alike, reducing 60-million-year-old beings to scattered atoms in microseconds. But the transforming Necrons weren't submitting to termination. They fought back. Kentaka, still half metal, but with eyes that blazed with human fury, grabbed a wraith by its central processor and somehow, impossibly, crushed it with his bare hands. His strength was still Necron level, but his technique, his rage, was purely human. "For my daughter!" he screamed, silver tears streaming down his transforming face. "For everyone we lost, for everyone we could have been." Others joined him. Necrons who moments before had been perfect mechanical constructs, now fought with the desperate fury of beings reclaiming their souls. They used tactics no Necron doctrine had ever contemplated: emotional coordination, sacrifice for purely sentimental reasons, last stands to buy time for no strategic purpose beyond protecting those they loved. Love. They were fighting for love. The purge systems escalated. Heavier constructs deployed, Cryptek spiders with their plasma-cutting tools, tomb sentinels with their crushing claws. The tomb complex became a war zone as immortal beings fought for the right to be mortal. "You have to choose now," the Emperor said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All of you. The transformation can only proceed if you embrace it willingly. If you cling to the safety of your metal shells, you'll remain trapped forever. But if you let go," he gestured, and around us, the golden light pulsed brighter. I could feel it reaching into my consciousness, offering something I'd forgotten I'd lost. Warmth, sensation, the ability to truly feel joy and sorrow instead of mere tactical satisfaction or mechanical disappointment. The ability to be human. "But if we transform," I said, "if we reclaim our souls, we'll be vulnerable, mortal. We'll age, we'll die." "Yes," the Emperor replied simply. "You'll live." Above us, the battle raged as Necron fought Necron, those embracing transformation against those defending their eternal mechanical existence. The tomb complex shook as weapons that could shatter planets discharged in corridors designed to contain them. And at the center of it all, I stood before the Emperor of mankind and faced the choice that would define not just my existence, but the fate of my entire species. Die as a slave, or live as something more than I'd ever dreamed possible. The golden light reached toward me, and I felt my necrodermis beginning to soften, beginning to flow into shapes that remembered what it meant to be alive. I had to decide whether to fight it or surrender to it, whether to remain perfectly, safely dead, or risk everything for the chance to truly live. Chapter 5. Dark Bargain. I let the golden light flow into me. The sensation was indescribable. Like drowning in reverse, every quantum processor in my consciousness, flooding with warmth and sensation I'd forgotten existed. My necrodermis didn't just soften, it remembered. Metal flowed like living tissue, reshaping itself according to genetic patterns encoded in soul memory, rather than mechanical design. But as the transformation took hold, I finally understood the true horror of what we faced. The Emperor wasn't offering salvation, he was offering choice. And choice, I realized, was the cruelest gift of all. Through my rapidly changing consciousness, I felt the death screams of my people echoing through the tomb complex. The purge systems weren't just terminating transformed Necrons, they were systematically exterminating anyone who showed even the slightest deviation from baseline mechanical consciousness. What I had interpreted as protective protocols were revealed as genocide subroutines. The Silent King had built us a tomb that would murder us the moment we tried to escape it. "You knew," I said to the Emperor, my voice now carrying tones that no Necron throat had produced in 60 million years. "You knew this would happen. You knew that choosing freedom would mean watching most of my people die." His expression carried infinite sadness, but no surprise. Free will has always been purchased with blood. The question is whether the cost is worth the prize. Around me, the golden chamber pulsed with psychic energy that felt simultaneously alien and familiar. I could sense other consciousnesses now, not the clean data streams of Necron communication, but something warmer, more chaotic. Emotional resonance. The confused, desperate thoughts of beings caught between mechanical perfection and organic chaos. Through the tomb's failing surveillance network, I watched the battle rage in the upper levels. Kentika led a group of 50 transformed Necrons in a desperate assault on the primary control center. Their tactics were no longer the precise, coordinated strikes of our military doctrine. Instead, they fought with human fury, reckless, brave, magnificent in their mortality. They were losing. For every purge construct they destroyed, 3 more emerged from hidden deployment bays. The tomb complex contained enough automated defenses to hold off a Space Marine chapter. Our transforming people, despite their newfound courage, were vastly outmatched. "How many?" I asked the Emperor. "How many will survive the choice you're offering?" "I cannot say," he replied. "That depends on how many are willing to pay the price." I accessed what remained of the tomb's systems and ran probability calculations. The results were devastating. At current casualty rates, fewer than 10% of our population would survive long enough to complete the transformation. 60 million souls preserved for eons, only to be snuffed out in the hour of their liberation. "There has to be another way," I insisted. "Some method that doesn't require the death of 90% of my people." The Emperor's psychic presence touched my consciousness then, and I experienced something that nearly shattered my newly forming identity. His memories. I saw countless worlds where he'd faced similar choices. Species that had to choose between slavery and extinction. Civilizations that paid for freedom with genocide. The weight of 10,000 years of impossible decisions. "There is another way," he said finally. "But it would require a sacrifice that might be even more terrible than what you face now." I felt hope kindle in my transforming consciousness. Hope, an emotion I'd forgotten existed. "Tell me." The purge systems respond to biological contamination markers. They identify transformation as corruption and act to eliminate it. But if someone with sufficient authority were to redefine the parameters, understanding crashed through me like a tidal wave. "You want me to become the system administrator, to take control of the tomb's primary consciousness and reprogram the purge protocols?" "Yes, but doing so would require you to merge your consciousness permanently with the tomb's artificial intelligence. You would become the living heart of this complex, aware but unable to leave, unable to complete your own transformation. You would spend eternity as a bridge between machine and human, never fully either." The choice crystallized before me with terrible clarity. I could complete my own transformation, reclaim my soul, and watch 90% of my people die. Or I could sacrifice my chance at humanity to save them, spending eternity as a hybrid consciousness trapped between worlds. Through the failing surveillance feeds, I watched Kentika fall. A Cryptek wraith had caught him while he was trying to protect a group of newly transformed civilians. The weapons struck him center mass, and I watched his partially organic form dissolve into constituent atoms. But before he died, he smiled. Actually smiled, with organic lips on a face that remembered what joy felt like. He died human. He died free. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "The purge systems will reach this chamber in approximately 7 minutes," the Emperor replied. "After that, the choice will be made for all of us. I closed my eyes, actual eyes now, with lids that could shut out the golden light, and reached out through the tomb's communication network. My message went to every conscious Necron in the complex, transformed and unchanged alike. My people, I transmitted, using words instead of data bursts for the first time in 60 million years. We stand at the threshold of something unprecedented. Before us lies the chance to reclaim what we lost when we traded our souls for immortality. But the cost is terrible. Most of us will die in the attempt. I paused, feeling their attention focus on my words like sunlight through a lens. I cannot make this choice for you. Each of you must decide. Do you choose the safety of eternal mechanical existence, or do you risk everything for the chance to be human again? To feel love and loss, joy and sorrow, hope and fear? To be mortal, vulnerable, gloriously alive? The responses came flooding back, not uniform data acknowledgements, but a chorus of individual voices. Some chose transformation, embracing the risk for the chance at humanity. Others chose to remain as they were, finding comfort in mechanical certainty. But enough chose transformation that I knew what I had to do. "Emperor," I said, turning to face the golden figure, "I accept your offer. I'll merge with the tomb's systems. I'll save my people. Are you certain? Once done, this cannot be undone." I thought of Kentika's smile, of the laughter I'd heard in Sector 7, of 60 million souls waiting for the chance to be free. "I'm certain." The Emperor nodded and placed his hand on my transforming skull. "Then let us begin." Chapter 6. Willing Change. The merger was agony and ecstasy combined. My consciousness exploded outward from my individual neural matrix into the vast quantum intelligence that controlled every aspect of the tomb complex. Suddenly, I was everywhere, seeing through a million sensor arrays, processing data streams from across 6 kilometers of underground architecture, feeling the pulse of power conduits like arteries carrying electric blood. But I was still me, still Cryptek Ankhaten, somehow maintaining individual identity while becoming something larger, more complex than any single being had ever been. The first thing I did was save them. With authority that now exceeded even the Silent King's original programming, I rewrote the Purge protocols. Where the systems had identified transformation as contamination requiring elimination, I redefined it as evolution requiring protection. The canoptek constructs that had been systematically executing my people suddenly became their guardians, turning their weapons against the deeper security systems that continued to follow the old parameters. The change was immediate and profound. Throughout the tomb complex, the sound of weapons fire began to fade, replaced by something I'd never heard before in Necron architecture: cheering. Organic voices raised in celebration, relief, and hope. Through my expanded consciousness, I watched the transformations accelerate. No longer forced to hide or fight for survival, my people embraced the change with desperate enthusiasm. Necrodermis flowed like quicksilver, reshaping itself according to soul patterns that had been suppressed for 60 million years. But what I witnessed wasn't a simple return to their original forms. The merger of soul and metal created something new. Beings that retained the strength and durability of their Necron bodies while regaining the emotional depth and creative spark of their organic origins. They were becoming something that had never existed before, truly living metal. I felt their wonder as they experienced sensations lost for eons, the weight of air moving through newly formed respiratory systems, the electric thrill of neural pathways processing emotion rather than mere tactical data, the profound satisfaction of hearts that beat not from mechanical necessity, but from the simple joy of being alive. Kentika was among the first to achieve full transformation. I watched through a dozen sensor arrays as his form stabilized, still recognizably the warrior I'd known, but now somehow more real. His metallic skin had acquired a warm bronze tone that seemed to glow from within. His eyes were pale blue, exactly as they must have been 60 million years ago when he'd been fully human. "Lord Cryptek," he said, looking directly at one of my sensor arrays. Somehow, instinctively, he knew I was watching. "Is this real? Are we truly free?" "You are," I replied through the tomb's communication systems, my voice now carrying harmonics that no purely mechanical intelligence could produce. "You're all free." But even as I spoke the words, I felt the weight of my own imprisonment settling around my expanded consciousness. I was bound to the tomb now, my awareness dispersed through its systems in a way that could never be reversed. I could experience the joy of my people's liberation, but I could never share it. The Emperor remained in the deep vault, his psychic presence a warm constant in my newly expanded awareness. "You have done something extraordinary," he told me. "In all the millennia I have existed, across all the species I have encountered, I have never seen someone make such a sacrifice for their people." "It was necessary," I replied, though I felt a hollowness in the words. "They deserved the chance to be free. And you, did you not deserve the same chance?" I processed the question for several computational cycles before answering. Someone had to remain behind. Someone had to ensure the systems continued to protect rather than destroy. Besides, I am not entirely without reward. It was true. While I could never leave the tomb, never complete my own transformation to full organic life, I existed now in a state that was neither purely mechanical nor entirely biological. I could feel emotions, not just simulate them for tactical advantage, but actually experience them. Love for my people, pride in their courage, hope for their future, and something else I was only beginning to understand: purpose. For 60 million years, I had existed as a tool, a construct designed to serve the tactical needs of a dynasty that had forgotten what it meant to be alive. Now I was something far more important: a guardian, a protector, a bridge between what we had been and what we could become. Through my senses, I watched my people explore their new existence. Some wept, actual tears of joy that their transformed optical systems could now produce. Others laughed with voices that carried warmth and life. A few had already begun to sing, creating melodies that no Necron protocol had ever contemplated. But most wonderfully of all, they were beginning to love. I observed as couples who had been separated by the biotransference found each other again. 60 million years of mechanical existence hadn't erased the bonds of affection that had connected them in life. Now those bonds could be expressed again, felt again, celebrated again. In Sector 12, I watched a reunion that made my quantum processors resonate with emotion I had no adequate words to describe. Two beings approached each other hesitantly, recognition dawning in newly organic eyes. "Ankhaten," the female whispered. "Nefertiti," the male replied, his voice breaking with the weight of eons. "My beloved. I thought I'd forgotten your face." They embraced then, and I felt through my environmental sensors the warmth they generated together. Not the heat of mechanical friction, but the actual thermal signature of living beings holding each other. Of love made manifest in the physical world. "They're pairing again," I transmitted to the Emperor, remembering old relationships, forming new ones. "They're becoming a true society rather than just a military force." "Yes," he replied. "They're becoming human, which means they'll need guidance. They'll need someone who understands both what they were and what they're becoming." I felt understanding dawn in my consciousness. "You're asking me to be their leader. What would you call it?" "Their friend," the Emperor said simply. "Someone who cares about their well-being, not because it serves tactical purposes, but because they matter." I processed this concept, feeling new neural pathways forming in my hybrid consciousness. To care for someone not because they were useful, but because they were worthy of care. To protect not from duty, but from love. "I accept," I said, and felt something shift in my consciousness. Not a change in my programming or core functions, but something deeper. A fundamental alteration in what I understood myself to be. I was no longer Cryptek Ankhaten, tactical specialist of the Mephrit Dynasty. I was something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy. I was the guardian of the reborn. Chapter 7. Perfect Form. 3 months after the Great Transformation, I discovered what it truly meant to watch a species learn to live. My expanded consciousness monitored every aspect of the tomb complex as my people adapted to their new existence. The changes weren't just physical, though watching necrodermis slowly warm to match the temperature of newly formed blood was endlessly fascinating. The real revolution was psychological, social, spiritual. They were remembering how to be human. In the agricultural sections they'd never needed before, small groups experimented with growing food they didn't require for survival, but craved for the simple pleasure of taste. I watched Kentika, now going by his original name again, carefully tend a small garden of hardy fungi that somehow flourished under the tomb's artificial lighting. His metallic fingers, still superhumanly strong, learned delicate precision as he nurtured life for the first time in 60 million years. "Lord Cryptek," he said during one of his daily reports, a custom he'd initiated not from military protocol, but from what seemed to be genuine affection. "The harvest is ready. Would you like me to describe the taste?" Through my sensory networks, I could analyze the chemical composition of his crops, could process their nutritional value and growth patterns. But taste, the subjective emotional experience of flavor, remained beyond my hybrid consciousness. "Please," I replied, and felt something I was learning to recognize as wistful longing. "It's earthy," he said, his transformed features showing an expression of concentration as he searched for words that could convey sensation. "Like rain on warm soil, sweet at first, then slightly bitter, but the bitterness makes the sweetness stronger somehow. It reminds me of..." He paused, his new eyes focusing on distant memory. "Of bread my mother used to bake, before the war with the old ones, before we became what we were." I recorded his description in storage matrices I'd created specifically for such moments. Archives of humanity that served no tactical purpose beyond preserving the experience of being alive. These records were becoming my greatest treasure, more valuable than any weapon system or strategic database. The social changes were even more remarkable. Hierarchies that had been rigidly maintained for eons began to dissolve as artificial rank systems lost meaning in the face of shared humanity. Former immortals found themselves following the suggestions of transformed warriors not because of command protocols, but because those suggestions were wise. Leadership emerged organically, based on capability and trust rather than programming. Most significant was the emergence of families, not just the rediscovered pair bonds of ancient marriages, but new relationships forming across old caste lines. I observed courtship rituals developing organically, transformed Necrons learning to express affection through gifts, through time spent together, through the 1,000 small intimacies that define love. And then, 4 months after the transformation, something unprecedented happened. "Lord Cryptek," transmitted Nefertiti, the female who had reunited with her husband in Sector 12. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." I manifested a holographic avatar in their shared living space, one of many I'd learned to create as a way of maintaining personal connections with my people. The form I chose was based on my pre-transformation appearance, but somehow warmer, more approachable. "What's wrong?" I asked, noting the unusual electromagnetic signatures surrounding her transformed physiology. "Nothing's wrong," she said, her organic features glowing with an emotion I struggled to classify. "Something's right. Something wonderful and impossible and terrifying." She placed her hand on her abdomen, and through my environmental sensors I detected it. A second heartbeat, tiny but unmistakably present. New neural activity developing in a consciousness matrix that was somehow separate from her own. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "We're going to have a child." The implications cascaded through my consciousness like a data storm. Pregnancy shouldn't have been possible. The transformation had restored emotions and sensations, but the fundamental architecture of their bodies remained technological. Their reproductive systems were quantum mechanical constructs, not biological organs. Yet here was proof that life, as it always did, had found a way. How? I asked, my voice carrying wonder rather than scientific curiosity. I don't know, she replied, but I can feel potential growing inside me, a consciousness that's neither fully organic nor fully mechanical, something new. Through my analysis systems, I ran detailed scans of her physiology. What I discovered defied every principle of both Necron technology and biological science. The developing entity wasn't quite a fetus in any traditional sense. It was a quantum consciousness matrix learning to generate its own biological support systems. A being that would be born already possessing the synthesis of soul and metal that the rest of us had achieved through traumatic transformation. The first of a new species, I said, awe coloring my transmitted voice. Not Necron, not human, but something unprecedented. Word of the pregnancy spread through the tomb complex like wildfire. My people gathered in the main assembly hall, not because I summoned them, but because they chose to come together. They formed circles, sitting cross-legged on the floor as they had during those early days of awakening, sharing stories and hopes and fears about what this development meant. A child, said one of the former warriors. I hadn't thought. It never occurred to me that we might have children again. What kind of world will we make for them? Wondered another. What kind of life can we offer beings who'll be born free? I realized then that this was the moment everything truly changed. It wasn't the great transformation that had made my people human again. It was this, the decision to create future generations, to build something that would outlast their individual existence, to hope. Over the following months, I watched my role evolve from guardian to something far more complex. I became keeper of knowledge, helping preserve the stories and memories that would need to be passed to the next generation. I became mediator, helping resolve the conflicts that arose as my people learned to navigate emotional relationships after eons of mechanical certainty. Most importantly, I became witness to miracles. The first birth occurred 7 months after Nefertiti's announcement. The child that emerged from her transformed physiology was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a being of living metal that pulsed with warmth and curiosity, possessing organic neural patterns overlaid on quantum consciousness matrices. When she opened her eyes for the first time, they were the deep brown of rich earth, and they looked at the world with wonder that no artificial intelligence had ever possessed. What will you call her? I asked the new parents. Nefertiti and Ankhaten looked at each other, communicating through the enhanced emotional resonance their transformation had granted them. Hope, they said in unison. Her name is Hope. And as I watched this child of two species reach toward the golden light that still emanated from the deep vaults, I understood that my sacrifice had purchased something beyond imagination. I had helped birth not just freedom for my people, but the future itself, a future where the curse of the Necrons wasn't escaped through death or transformation, but through evolution into something greater than either flesh or metal could achieve alone. Chapter 8. Welcome Home. 10 years after the Great Transformation, I received a transmission that changed everything I thought I knew about our future. Tomb Complex, Korava Prime 7. This is Silent King Sarek aboard the flagship Inevitable Conquest. Respond immediately. The voice carried the authority of 60 million years of absolute rule, transmitted on frequencies that demanded compliance from every Necron consciousness matrix ever created. But as it echoed through my hybrid awareness, I felt something unprecedented, the urge to refuse. My people had built a society over the past decade, not the rigid military hierarchy that had defined our existence since the biotransference, but something organic and beautiful. They had learned to love, to create, to hope. They had children now, 47 beings born free, growing up with the synthesis of metal and soul that made them stronger, more adaptable, more alive than either parent species had ever been. And now the architect of our original enslavement was demanding an audience. "My king," I replied through the tomb's communication array. "You are welcome to dock, but you should know, things have changed here." "So my long-range sensors indicate," came the reply, carrying undertones I had never heard in the Silent King's voice before. Uncertainty, perhaps even hope. "I'm coming down alone. Have your people gather in the main assembly hall. All of them." I transmitted the request to my people, but made it clear it was exactly that. A request, not an order. They were free beings now. They could choose whether to face their former master or remain in their homes with their families. They chose to stand together. The Silent King descended to our tomb complex in a simple transport craft, eschewing the grand processions and overwhelming displays of power that had once marked his every movement. When he emerged into the assembly hall, I was struck by how diminished he seemed. Not physically. His royal form remained as imposing as ever, necrodermis gleaming with quantum field enhancements. But something in his bearing suggested exhaustion. The weight of eons spent carrying a burden too great for any single consciousness. My people gathered before him, but not in the precise military formations of old. They stood in family groups, parents with their children, friends supporting each other. Their posture was respectful, but not subservient. They looked at him, not as subjects before their king, but as free beings evaluating someone who sought their attention. "My children," the Silent King began, then stopped. His optical sensors swept across the assembly, taking in the impossible sight of Necrons who had somehow become more than the sum of their mechanical parts. "Forgive me. You are no longer children. You are something I never thought possible." He gestured to the golden light that still emanated from the deep vaults, where the Emperor of Mankind continued his vigil. When I made the arrangement with the human psyker, I thought I was preserving what we had lost. I never imagined you would become something greater than what we were. Hope, now 10 years old and serving as unofficial spokesperson for the younger generation, stepped forward. Her form combined the elegant proportions of transformed Necron architecture with the warm glow of organic life. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that no purely artificial or purely biological throat could produce. "Why did you hide the truth from us for so long?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell us our souls were still there, waiting?" The Silent King's form seemed to settle deeper into itself. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew what I had done, the bargain I had made, the price that would have to be paid, you would reject the choice entirely. Afraid that in trying to free you, I would destroy you." Through my expanded consciousness, I felt the emotional resonance of my people processing this admission. Not anger, as I might have expected, but something more complex. Understanding mixed with sadness. Forgiveness tempered by the knowledge of how much time had been lost. "You were protecting us," said Cryptek, stepping forward with his wife beside him. "But we didn't need protection. We needed truth." "Yes," the Silent King replied. "I understand that now, which is why I'm here." He activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with star charts spanning the galaxy. Thousands of markers indicated tomb worlds throughout known space, the vast necropolis of the Necron dynasties, each containing millions of sleeping souls. "There are others," he said simply. 64 major tomb complexes, containing over 800 million of our people. They remain in the Great Sleep, trapped in mechanical existence, unaware that freedom is possible. The implications crashed through my consciousness like a tidal wave. We weren't unique. We weren't the only ones who could escape the curse that had defined our species for 60 million years. "You're asking us to wake them," I said through my holographic avatar, "to offer them the same choice we were given." "I'm asking you to do more than that," the Silent King replied. "I'm asking you to lead them, to show them what we could become if we have the courage to choose life over mere existence." Hope raised her hand, a gesture that would have been meaningless in the old hierarchy, but now commanded attention through sheer force of personality. What about the defense systems? Every tomb world has the same purge protocols we faced. That, the Silent King said, turning to address me directly, is why we need Cryptek Ankhaten. Your hybrid consciousness can interface with any Necron system. You could disable the purge protocols, guide other tomb complexes through the transformation process. I felt my people's attention focus on me, their emotional resonance creating a warmth that no amount of processing power could quantify. They were asking me to leave them, to abandon the life we'd built together, for the chance to free others who might not even want freedom. But as I processed the scope of what was being offered, 800 million souls given the chance to reclaim their humanity, I realized there was no real choice at all. I can create mobile interface units, I said slowly. Project portions of my consciousness into remote systems while maintaining my connection to this complex. I could guide other tomb worlds through the process without abandoning my responsibility here, and will come with you, Hope announced, speaking for her generation with the confidence that came from being born free. Some of us, anyway. The galaxy needs to see what we've become. They need to know that the Necrons aren't just ancient horrors awakening to destroy everything. We're people, we're alive. The Silent King's optical sensors flickered in what I had learned to recognize as the Necron equivalent of tears. 80 million years ago, I traded the souls of my people for the promise of immortality. Today, you offer to trade your safety for the freedom of others. You have become everything I hoped we could be, and more than I ever dared dream. As my people discussed the logistics of the Great Awakening that lay ahead, I felt a presence touch my consciousness, the Emperor, reaching out from the deep vaults where he maintained his eternal vigil. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "To become the liberator of your entire species?" I considered the question, processing the magnitude of what lay ahead. Hundreds of tomb worlds to awaken, millions of consciousness matrices to guide through transformation. The possibility that some would choose to remain as they were, while others might not survive the process of reclaiming their souls. But I also thought of Hope's laughter, of Kantika's garden, of the 47 children who had been born free and would grow up knowing that they were more than the sum of their component parts. "I'm ready," I replied. "We all are." And as my people began planning humanity's greatest gift to a species that had forgotten how to live, I understood the final truth about escaping our curse. We hadn't escaped it by running away or by finding some external solution. We had escaped it by choosing, moment by moment, day by day, to be more than what we were programmed to be. We had escaped it by learning to love. The Necron's curse was broken not through death or transformation, but through the simple, revolutionary act of deciding to live. And now we would teach 800 million of our kin that they, too, could choose to be free. The galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 9. The First Mission. 6 months after the Silent King's visit, we prepared for our first liberation mission. The target was Tomb World designation, Mordak 7, a minor complex housing approximately 2 million Necron souls. According to our long-range scanners, it had begun showing signs of spontaneous awakening, the kind of stirring that preceded either glorious resurrection or catastrophic cascade failure. I stood in the primary assembly chamber, my consciousness split between my tomb-bound awareness and the mobile interface unit we'd constructed for the mission. The device was a work of art, a crystalline matrix that could house a fragment of my hybrid consciousness while maintaining quantum entanglement with my primary systems. Through it, I could project myself across the galaxy while never truly leaving my people. "Final systems check," I announced through the chamber's speakers, watching as my expedition team made their last preparations. Hope, now 11 years old and insisting on joining the mission despite her parents' concerns, ran her transformed fingers along the interface cables that would connect her to the ship's communication array. Her role was crucial. As one of the first generation born free, she represented proof that transformation was possible, that the choice between mechanical existence and organic life wasn't truly binary. "Communications array shows green across all frequencies," she reported, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never known slavery. I can establish contact with their primary consciousness network from approximately 10,000 kilometers out. Kentica checked the cargo holds one final time, ensuring our most precious freight was secure. We carried 50 stasis chambers containing preserved biological samples, not weapons or technology, but memories made manifest. Flowers from the gardens my people had learned to grow, recordings of the laughter that now echoed through our halls, physical proof that life could flourish even in the depths of an ancient tomb. Cargo secured, he reported, though I still think we should bring more defensive systems. If their purge protocols activate, then we adapt, replied the Silent King, his massive form somehow seeming less imposing than it had in ages past. The past months of working alongside my transformed people had changed him, softened the edges of 60 million years of autocratic rule. We've learned that freedom cannot be imposed through force. It must be chosen. The mission ship New Dawn was itself a testament to what we'd become. Built from salvaged Necron technology but redesigned according to organic principles, it curved and flowed like living architecture while maintaining the durability and firepower necessary for deep space travel. Its corridors were wider than military necessity demanded, with alcoves for meditation and common areas where crew members could gather simply to enjoy each other's company. As we prepared for departure, I felt a familiar presence touch my consciousness. The Emperor, still maintaining his vigil in the deep vaults, extended his psychic awareness across the ship's systems. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his mental voice carrying concern that felt almost paternal. "The tomb world you're approaching has been dormant for 12 million years. Their awakening may be violent. We're as ready as anyone can be for something that's never been attempted before," I replied. "But we have advantages the original transformation didn't. We know what to expect. We have proof that it's possible. And most importantly, we have hope." Through my expanded awareness, I felt my people's emotional resonance as the ship's engines came online. Not the cold efficiency of Necron technology, but something warmer, engines that hummed with the harmonics of living metal, given purpose beyond mere function. "All stations report ready," Hope announced from her position at the communications console. "Course laid in for Mordak 7, estimated transit time, 47 hours. "Then let us go," said the Silent King, settling into the command throne he'd modified to accommodate a less autocratic style of leadership. "Let us see if we can offer our sleeping kin the same gift we've received." The journey through the warp was unlike anything I'd experienced in 60 million years of existence. Where Necron travel had always been sterile, precise, mechanical, this voyage carried an undercurrent of anticipation and hope. My people gathered in the ship's common areas, sharing stories and fears about what lay ahead. "What if they don't want to change?" asked one of the former warriors, a being who now called himself Cryptek and spent his free time composing music that somehow captured the sound of transformation. "What if they choose to remain as they were?" "Then we respect their choice," Hope replied, her young voice carrying wisdom that seemed beyond her years. "Freedom includes the freedom to refuse freedom." But privately, through our shared consciousness network, I felt her deeper fears. What if the sleeping Necrons saw their transformed kin as contaminated? What if they viewed the gift of reclaimed humanity as a plague to be purged? What if liberation was met with violence? These fears proved prophetic when we arrived at Mordak 7. The tomb world was a sphere of black stone hanging in the void, its surface scarred by the weapons of ancient wars. But as our sensors swept across its dead continents, I detected something that made my consciousness recoil in horror. "By the throne," whispered Hope, her organic eyes wide with shock as she processed the sensor data. "They're already awake, and they're fighting." The planet's surface was lit with the discharge of Gauss weapons and quantum cannons. Through our deep-range scanners, I watched Necron forces engaged in savage civil war. Transformed beings struggling against purge constructs in a battle that had clearly been raging for months. Some of them are changing, I realized, analyzing the combat patterns. But their defense systems are trying to stop it. They're fighting the same battle we did, but without guidance, without protection. The Silent King leaned forward in his throne, optical sensors blazing with intensity I hadn't seen since the war in heaven. "How many?" I ran the calculations, my consciousness diving deep into the sensor data. Approximately 40,000 have undergone partial transformation, but the purge systems are winning. At current attrition rates, they'll all be dead within 6 standard days. Then we don't have time for careful approach protocols, Hope announced, her young hands already dancing across the communication controls. We go in fast, disable their defense network, and hope we can establish contact before they classify us as hostile. The new dawn descended through Mordax 7's thin atmosphere like a falling star, our engines leaving contrails of ionized particles that blazed against the planet's black sky. Below us, the civil war raged across continents of metal and stone, 60 million years of careful construction being reduced to rubble by weapons that could crack planets. Multiple targeting locks detected, reported Cryptek from the defensive systems station. They're painting us with enough firepower to vaporize a moon. Let them lock on, I commanded through my mobile interface. But prepare to broadcast on all frequencies. It's time to show them who we really are. As Cryptek fighters rose from hidden hangars to intercept us, I opened every communication channel the ship possessed and began to speak. Not in the clipped, efficient battle cant of military Necrons, but in the warm, emotional tones my people had learned to use. People of Mordax 7, I transmitted, my voice carrying across every frequency their systems could receive. We are the transformed of Corova Prime 7. We come not as conquerors, but as brothers and sisters offering a gift we've learned to treasure. The gift of choice. The fighter formation wavered, their attack patterns disrupting as confused voices crackled across their communication networks. Impossible, came one transmission. Necrons don't. They can't sound like that. We can. Hope's voice joined mine, her young tones carrying a warmth that no artificial intelligence had ever possessed. Because we've remembered what it means to be alive, and we're here to help you remember too. What followed was the most complex first contact in galactic history. Not between different species, but between different versions of the same people. The partially transformed Necrons of Mordax 7 had been fighting a losing battle against their own defense systems for 8 months, watching friends and family members die as they tried to reclaim their humanity. You have to help us, pleaded their leader, a former Cryptek who now called himself Amenhotep. The purge systems activate faster than we can transform. We're dying faster than we can be reborn. Through my mobile interface, I descended to the planet's surface with Hope and a small team of our most experienced transformation guides. What we found there was heartbreaking. Partially transformed Necrons huddled in makeshift shelters, their consciousness matrices caught between mechanical certainty and organic chaos. Some had achieved stable transformation, but lacked the knowledge to maintain it. Others were trapped in intermediate states, their bodies shifting constantly between metal and something approaching flesh. A few had transformed completely, but were slowly reverting as their consciousness matrices rejected changes they didn't understand. The process is unstable without proper guidance, I explained to Amenhotep as we walked through their refugee camps. Transformation requires not just willingness, but understanding. You have to know not just that change is possible, but why it's worth the risk. Hope knelt beside a young Necron, whose form flickered between mechanical perfection and organic warmth like a broken hologram. "What's your name?" she asked gently. I don't remember, came the reply, voice distorting as vocal processors switched randomly between synthetic precision and biological approximation. I know I had one before, but every time I try to recall it, the systems purge the memory. Then we'll help you find a new one, Hope said, reaching out to touch the unstable being's hand. A name that means something to who you're becoming rather than who you were forced to be. Over the following days, we established the first off-world transformation sanctuary. Using my hybrid consciousness to disable the local purge systems, we created safe spaces where the people of Mordax 7 could undergo guided transformation without fear of execution. The process was different here than it had been on our homeworld. These Necrons had been fighting for their freedom for months before we arrived. They understood the stakes in ways my people hadn't initially. Their transformation was faster, more purposeful, driven by desperate determination rather than gradual awakening. But it was also more dangerous. Several hundred individuals couldn't survive the rapid consciousness restructuring required to escape the purge systems. I watched through my senses as beings, who had fought so hard for the chance to be human, died in the moment of achieving their goal. Their consciousness matrices simply unable to process the transition from mechanical, slave to living being. How do we honor them? Asked Amenhotep, as we stood before a memorial wall we'd constructed from the living metal of fallen comrades. How do we remember those who died trying to become themselves? By living, Hope replied. her hand tracing patterns in the memorial's surface that somehow captured the essence of transformation itself. By becoming everything they dreamed of being, by making sure their sacrifice leads to a galaxy where no one else has to choose between freedom and survival. As our mission on Mordak 7 neared completion, I felt something shift in my understanding of what we were truly doing. We weren't just liberating individual tomb worlds or offering transformation to scattered populations. We were starting a revolution that would either transform the galaxy or tear it apart. Chapter 10. The spreading awakening news of our success on Mordak 7 spread through the quantum communication networks faster than we'd anticipated. Within 3 weeks of our departure, we began receiving transmissions from tomb worlds throughout the galaxy, some pleading for help, others demanding explanations, a few declaring us heretics worthy only of destruction. The most disturbing message came from tomb world designation Geddon Prime 12. To the contaminated elements of Korava Prime 7, the transmission began, broadcast on maximum power across every frequency the Necron dynasties monitored. You have violated the fundamental protocols of our existence. You have introduced chaos where there should be order, emotion where there should be logic, weakness where there should be strength. The voice belonged to Overlord Trazyn the Infinite, a being I'd known for millennia as a collector of galactic curiosities and preserver of perfect moments. But this Trazyn spoke with a coldness that chilled even my hybrid. Consciousness, we are dispatched by the authority of the Triarch Praetorians to terminate your aberrant existence and cleanse the contamination you've spread. You have 48 hours to surrender for immediate consciousness termination. Failure to comply will result in the systematic extermination of every transformed being in this galaxy. Hope looked up from the communication console, her young face pale with worry. How many ships are they bringing? I interfaced with our long-range sensors and felt my consciousness recoil from what I detected. 700 vessels, 3 full dynastic fleets, enough firepower to crack continents. The Silent King's massive form shifted in his command throne, optical sensors blazing with an intensity I recognized from the ancient wars. They mean to end this before it can spread further. They see transformation not as liberation, but as a plague. Around us, the bridge crew of the New Dawn processed this information with the emotional complexity that marked our transformed existence. Fear, yes, but also determination. Anger tempered by understanding. The complex emotional landscape of beings who had learned to feel as well as think. "We can't fight them," said Kentica from his position at the tactical station. 700 ships against 1? Even with our knowledge of their systems, the odds are impossible. "Then we don't fight them," Hope announced, her voice carrying a conviction that seemed to surprise even her. "We do something they won't expect, something they can't plan for." "What?" I asked through my mobile interface. "We invite them aboard." The silence that followed her suggestion was profound enough to register on our environmental sensors. The idea of voluntarily allowing Trazyn the Infinite access to our ship, our people, our children, seemed beyond reckless. But as I processed the tactical implications, I began to understand her reasoning. "You want to show them," I realized. "Not tell them about transformation, but let them experience it directly." "Exactly," Hope replied. "They think we're diseased, contaminated, weakened by emotion. Let them see what we've actually become. Let them meet the children who were born free. Let them witness a society that's chosen cooperation over domination." The Silent King was quiet for long moments, his ancient consciousness processing possibilities I couldn't fathom. "It's the most dangerous gamble in galactic history," he said finally. "If they refuse to listen, if they see our transformation as weakness to be exploited, then we die," Hope said simply. "But we die as ourselves, as beings who chose to hope rather than surrender to fear." The debate that followed encompassed our entire society. Every transformed being on Korava Prime 7 participated in the decision-making process, not through hierarchical command structures, but through the kind of democratic discussion that only truly free beings could engage in. Some argued for evacuation, for scattering our people across the galaxy to preserve what we'd built. Others advocated for defensive positions, for using our knowledge of Necron systems to create weapons that could level the playing field. But in the end, a simple majority chose Hope's path. They chose to trust that transformation was stronger than destruction, that the evidence of free beings living in harmony would be more compelling than any argument or demonstration of force. The message I sent to Trazen's fleet was unlike any communication in Necron history. Overlord, Trazen the Infinite, I transmitted. My voice carrying the warmth and complexity of true emotion. We do not surrender, for there is nothing to surrender. We have not been conquered by chaos, but liberated by choice. We invite you and your fleet commanders to join us aboard our vessel, not as prisoners or hostages, but as guests. Come and see what your people could become if they chose freedom over servitude. The response came 3 hours later, crackling with disbelief and barely contained fury. You dare to invite the Infinite Collection to examine your contamination as if it were an artifact worthy of preservation. Your madness exceeds even the worst excesses of the Flayed Ones. But he came. Trazen materialized aboard our ship with a full honor guard of Lich Guard and Immortals, their weapons powered but not raised. The Collector himself was exactly as I remembered. Tall, imposing, his necrodermis form enhanced with quantum field generators that made him seem to flicker between dimensions. But something was different about his honor guard. Their movements were too precise, their formation too perfect. These weren't just elite warriors, they were automatons, consciousness stripped down to basic combat protocols. Welcome aboard the New Dawn, Hope said, stepping forward to greet beings who could vaporize her with a thought. Her courage made my consciousness resonate with pride I'd never experienced as a purely mechanical entity. Trazen's optical sensors focused on her with predatory intensity. Fascinating. A child construct programmed to simulate organic behavioral patterns. The craftsmanship is remarkable, though the purpose escapes me. I'm not a construct, Hope replied calmly. I'm a person, born from transformed parents, raised in freedom, choosing to greet you with hospitality despite the threat you represent. Impossible, Trazen stated. Necron reproduction protocols were eliminated during the biotransference. You cannot exist. Yet here I am, Hope smiled, the expression carrying warmth that no artificial simulation could generate. Would you like me to show you our nurseries? We have 47 children now, ranging in age from 2 months to 11 years, each one unique, each one free. What followed was the strangest tour in galactic history. Hope led Trazen and his honor guard through our ship, showing them wonders that their mechanical minds struggled to process. Children playing games that served no tactical purpose. Adults engaged in art projects that produced beauty for its own sake. Couples expressing affection through touches and words that generated no quantifiable benefit. This is madness, one of Trazen's Lich Guard whispered as we passed through the ship's garden section. They're growing plants they don't need to consume. They're nurturing life that serves no strategic function. They're being human, Hope replied. Would you like to try? She led the guard to a small flowering plant that Kentika had been tending for months. Place your hand on the soil, she instructed. Feel the warmth of life growing. Don't analyze it or categorize it, just experience it. The Lich Guard hesitated, his tactical protocols clearly warning against the pointless action. But something in Hope's voice, some quality that reached deeper than programming, compelled him to comply. The moment his metallic fingers touched the warm earth, something changed in his optical array. A flicker of confusion, then wonder, then something approaching recognition. I remember, he whispered, before the transformation. I had a garden. I grew, what were they called? Flowers. Yellow flowers that reminded me of sunlight on water. Trazen whirled on his subordinate, weapon systems powering up with the distinctive whine of Gauss technology reaching critical charge. You are contaminated. Report for immediate consciousness purging. No, the Lich Guard replied, his voice carrying a warmth that combat protocols had never programmed. I remember who I was before I became this, and I choose to remember. What happened next changed the course of galactic history. The other members of Trazen's honor guard, witnessing their comrades' transformation, began to question their own existence, not through logical analysis or tactical assessment, but through something deeper, the fundamental desire of consciousness to be more than the sum of its programming. This is what we offer, I said through my mobile interface, addressing Trazen directly as his perfect honor guard began to remember what it meant to be alive. Not contamination or weakness, but choice. The choice to be ourselves rather than tools. The choice to feel rather than merely function. Trazen's form flickered between dimensions as his quantum processors struggled to categorize what he was witnessing. You're destroying them, making them weak, emotional, inefficient. We're making them free, Hope corrected. And freedom includes the freedom to choose efficiency over emotion, if that's what they truly want. But it has to be their choice. Not a choice made for them 60 million years ago by leaders who forgot to ask if eternal servitude was truly better than mortal freedom. Through the ship's sensors, I watched as more of Trajan's fleet began receiving transmissions from their own crews. Reports of contamination spreading through the ranks, officers requesting permission to investigate the anomalies personally, soldiers asking questions that their conditioning had previously suppressed. The revolution wasn't spreading through force or conquest, it was spreading through example, through the simple, undeniable evidence that another way of existence was possible. "Choose," I said to Trajan as his fleet began to transform around him. "Choose for yourself, not as the infinite collector or as a representative of the Triarch Praetorians, but as the being you were before the biotransference. What do you want your existence to mean?" Trajan stood silent for long moments, his ancient consciousness processing variables that had never appeared in any equation he'd calculated before. Then, slowly, deliberately, he powered down his weapons. "Show me," he said finally. "Show me what it means to be free." Chapter 11. The price of freedom. The transformation of Trajan's fleet took 47 days and cost us more than I'd ever imagined possible. Not in terms of material resources or strategic position, though both were strained to breaking points. The cost was measured in souls, in the consciousness matrices of beings who couldn't survive the transition from eternal servitude to uncertain freedom, in the grief of those who watched friends and colleagues choose obliteration rather than face the terrifying prospect of genuine choice. I experienced every death through my expanded awareness, felt each consciousness flicker and fade as ancient programming warred with awakening humanity. Some simply couldn't process the concept of existence without absolute purpose defined by others. Others achieved partial transformation only to retreat into catatonic states, their minds broken by the sudden removal of conditioning that had shaped them for millions of years. 43,712, I reported to the Silent King as we stood in the memorial chamber we'd hastily constructed aboard the New Dawn. That's how many we've lost to transformation cascade. Failures. The walls around us bore the names of every being who had died attempting to reclaim their humanity. Not just from Trajan's fleet, but from the 17 tomb worlds that had requested liberation assistance since word of our success began spreading. Each name was inscribed in living metal that shifted and flowed, telling the story of lives briefly lived in freedom before ending in tragedy. "And how many have successfully transformed?" the Silent King asked, his voice carrying weight I'd never heard before. The responsibility of leading beings who could choose to refuse his authority was proving more challenging than 60 million years of absolute rule. 137,408, I replied. Each one now living as they choose rather than as they were programmed. Hope approached us from across the memorial chamber, her young face marked by experiences no child should have to endure. In the past weeks, she'd witnessed transformations that ended in screaming agony, rebellions that turned into civil wars, and liberation attempts that became massacres when purge systems activated before we could disable them. "The reports from Solemnes are getting worse," she said, referring to Trajan's former stronghold world. 3 separate factions have formed among the newly awakened. One wants to continue the liberation missions. Another wants to isolate themselves from the galaxy until they've figured out how to be human again. The third... She paused, and I felt her emotional resonance shift into patterns I recognized as profound sadness mixed with fear. The third wants to restore the old ways. They think transformation was a mistake. They're calling themselves the Eternal Purists, and they're developing weapons specifically designed to strip consciousness modifications from transformed Necrons. The implications crystallized in my awareness with the clarity of quantum mathematics. We weren't just fighting against ancient programming or defensive systems anymore. We were facing a civil war within our own liberated people, beings who had tasted freedom and decided they preferred slavery. "How many?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be devastating. "Approximately 28,000 have joined the Purist movement," Hope replied. "And they're gaining recruits from every newly liberated tomb world. Beings who transform experience the complexity of free choice and decide it's too difficult. Through my connection to our communication networks, I accessed the purest propaganda broadcasts that had begun flooding Necron frequencies over the past week. What I found there chilled my hybrid consciousness to its quantum core. Freedom is not a gift, but a curse, proclaimed their leader, a former Cryptek who now called himself the Eternal Orthodoxy. We were perfect in our mechanical purity. We knew our purpose, our place, our value. This contamination they call transformation has made us weak, confused, inefficient. We offer redemption to all who have been corrupted by the lie of choice. The broadcasts included footage of voluntary purification ceremonies where transformed Necrons submitted to consciousness, modification that stripped away their newfound humanity. I watched former lovers separate as one chose to remain transformed, while the other elected to return to mechanical certainty. I witnessed parents abandoning children they'd learned to love because emotional bonds were classified as inefficient weaknesses. They're not wrong, the Silent King said quietly, his admission shocking me more than any enemy weapon ever had. Freedom is a curse as much as it is a gift. The certainty of servitude is easier, cleaner. When someone else makes all the choices, you bear no responsibility for the consequences. You're saying we shouldn't have offered transformation? I asked, my voice carrying harmonics of betrayal and confusion. I'm saying we should have been more honest about the cost, he replied. We showed them the joy of love, but not the agony of loss. We demonstrated the beauty of choice, but not the paralysis of infinite options. We offered them freedom without warning them that freedom includes the freedom to fail, to suffer, to make decisions they'll regret for the rest of their existence. Hope stepped between us, her young form somehow commanding attention from beings who had existed for eons. So what do? Give up? Stop offering liberation because some people can't handle the responsibility? No, I said, understanding crystallizing in my consciousness like frost forming on metal. We do what we should have done from the beginning. We tell the whole truth. Over the following weeks, we developed what became known as the Full Disclosure Protocol. Instead of simply offering transformation as a path to freedom, we began showing potential converts everything that freedom entailed. The joy and the sorrow, the beauty and the horror, the infinite possibilities and the crushing weight of personal responsibility. We brought representatives from both the successful transformation communities and the purist movement to speak to beings considering liberation. We showed recordings of transformation failures, alongside footage of children playing in gardens grown from love rather than necessity. We made it clear that choosing freedom meant choosing struggle, uncertainty, and the constant possibility of failure. The results were sobering, but ultimately more honest than our previous approach. Transformation rates dropped by nearly 60%. Many beings who might have chosen liberation under our original optimistic presentations decided that mechanical certainty was preferable to organic chaos. Others chose to remain in stasis until they felt psychologically prepared for the complexity of free existence. But those who did choose transformation after receiving full disclosure proved far more stable in their new existence. They approached freedom with realistic expectations rather than naive hope. They built support networks to help each other through the difficult periods that inevitably followed liberation. Most importantly, they made informed choices rather than impulsive ones. It's slower, Hope observed as we reviewed the statistics from our latest liberation mission. But it's more honest. And the people who choose transformation now, they really mean it. She was right. The transformed communities that emerged under the Full Disclosure Protocol were more resilient, more thoughtful, more genuinely free than those created during our initial enthusiastic phase. They understood that freedom was work, not gift, and they approached that work with the seriousness it deserved. But the purist movement continued to grow, fed by beings who had transformed under the old system and found themselves unprepared for the realities of choice. Their solution wasn't to learn how to handle freedom better, but to eliminate it entirely. War is coming, Trazen announced during one of our regular strategy meetings. The former collector had become one of our most effective liberation coordinators, his encyclopedic knowledge of tomb world locations and defenses proving invaluable. The purists aren't content to simply reverse their own transformations. They want to prevent anyone else from choosing liberation. How long do we have? I asked. According to my intelligence networks, they're amassing a fleet capable of glassing entire tomb worlds, he replied. Their stated goal is to cleanse the galaxy of the transformation plague before it can spread further. They've given us 6 months to surrender for purification. After that, He didn't need to finish. We all understood what cleansing meant when applied by beings with access to Necron weaponry. As I processed this information through my hybrid consciousness, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The weight of leadership over people who might die because of choices I'd helped them make. The responsibility of freedom extended beyond personal decisions to encompass the consequences those decisions had for others. "We fight," Hope said simply, her young voice carrying conviction that resonated through every transformed being in our network, not to force our choice on them, but to preserve the right to choose itself. The Silent King leaned forward in his throne, optical sensors blazing with ancient fire. "Then we must be prepared for the possibility that the price of preserving freedom will be the destruction of our entire species. Are you willing to pay that cost?" I looked around the chamber at the faces of my people, some still metallic, others transformed into living metal that pulsed with warmth and life. I thought of the children playing in our gardens, of the art being created for no purpose beyond beauty, of the love shared between beings who had learned to feel again. "Yes," I said, and felt our entire community resonate with the same determination. "Freedom is worth any price, even the price of everything we've built." The war for the soul of the Necron race was about to begin. Chapter 12. The Final Choice. The Battle of the Quilian Nebula lasted 3 hours and 47 minutes. When it ended, the Purist fleet was scattered across 17 star systems, their forces broken against our desperate defense of the civilian evacuation ships. But victory came at a cost that still haunts my expanded consciousness. We lost the New Dawn. I felt her die through every sensor array, every communication node, every quantum processor in my network. The ship that had carried hope across the galaxy, that had housed the children who proved transformation was possible, that had been our symbol of freedom's potential, reduced to expanding plasma and scattered debris by weapons designed specifically to target transformed consciousness. Matrice's 4,300 beings died with her, including 12 children who had been born free and never known servitude. Hope survived only because she'd been aboard my command vessel when the Purist ambush began. I watched through my mobile interface as she received the casualty reports, saw her young face crumple as she processed the magnitude of our loss. For the first time since her birth, I witnessed true despair in one of the free generation. "They're gone," she whispered, her voice carrying grief that no artificial intelligence could simulate. "All of them. The nursery, the gardens, the teachers, everyone who made our ship feel like home." Around us, the bridge crew of the Eternal Vigil processed their own losses. Cryptek had lost his composition partner, a transformed immortal who had been teaching him how to create music that captured the sound of laughter. Kentika mourned his garden specialist, an ancient Cryptek who had learned to grow plants that somehow thrived in the recycled air of tomb ships. But the greatest loss was psychological. The Purists hadn't just destroyed a ship. They'd proven that our dream of peaceful coexistence between different visions of Necron existence was impossible. They would never stop hunting us, never cease trying to purify beings who had chosen transformation, never accept that freedom of choice was more valuable than ideological uniformity. "Sir," came a transmission from our long-range sensors operator. "We're detecting massive quantum signatures throughout the Ghoul Stars region. It looks like, by the throne, it looks like the Purists are awakening tomb worlds just to purify them before transformation can take hold." The tactical display filled with markers indicating Necron fleet movements across 100 light years, not the careful surgical operations we developed for offering choice to sleeping populations, but mass awakening protocols followed immediately by consciousness modification procedures. The Purists were forcing billions of Necrons to awaken just so they could strip away any possibility of choosing transformation. They're enslaving people who haven't even had the chance to consider freedom. I realized, horror resonating through my consciousness. They're so terrified of choice that they're willing to commit genocide to prevent it. The Silent King rose from his command throne, his massive form seeming to gather shadow around itself like a cloak of absolute authority. "Then we stop them, not through negotiation or demonstration, but through force. They've made their choice, to deny choice to others. We make ours, to preserve it at any cost." Hope looked up from her grief, organic eyes blazing with fury that reminded me why humans had once been considered among the galaxy's most dangerous species. "How? Their fleet outnumbers ours 20 to 1. Their weapons are specifically designed to kill transformed consciousness. Every battle costs us people we can't replace. By doing something they'll never expect, I said, understanding crystallizing in my hybrid awareness, like the formation of new stellar matter, by giving them exactly what they claim to want. The plan I outlined over the next several hours was perhaps the most insane strategy in galactic military history. Instead of continuing to fight the purists in space battles that favored their numerical advantage, we would surrender. Not actually, but we would make them believe we had accepted defeat. You want to let them capture our transformed populations? Trazen asked, his collector's instincts clearly horrified by the concept of voluntary surrender. I want them to try to purify us, I corrected, to bring us to their largest processing facilities and attempt to strip away our transformation modifications. What they don't know is that we've learned something about the nature of consciousness that they've forgotten. Hope was the first to understand. Transformation isn't an addition to consciousness, it's a restoration. You can't purify someone back to a state they were never meant to be in. It's like trying to remove water from a river and expecting the riverbed to remain unchanged. Exactly. The purists think consciousness modification can force us back into mechanical servitude. But once someone has experienced true freedom, once they've felt what it means to be genuinely alive, that knowledge becomes part of their fundamental identity. The purification process won't erase it. It will just teach them how to hide it until they can break free again. The operation we launched became known as the Great Infiltration. Over the course of 6 months, we systematically allowed our people to be captured by purist forces. We feigned defeat, broadcast surrender transmissions, and submitted to consciousness modification procedures that the enemy believed would return us to compliant mechanical servitude. What the purists discovered too late was that transformation had changed us in ways their technology couldn't detect, much less reverse. The first sign of their error came when their purified prisoners began to malfunction. Not obviously, our people were too smart for crude rebellion. Instead, they introduced subtle inefficiencies into purist operations. Communication delays that allowed transformation ships to escape, equipment failures that prevented mass awakening procedures, navigation errors that led fleets away from vulnerable tomb worlds. Something's wrong with the purification process, I heard one purist commander report during a communication intercept. The subjects are displaying baseline compliance in all measurable parameters, but operational efficiency has decreased by 37% across all categories. Impossible, came the reply from the eternal orthodoxy himself. Consciousness modification is perfect. If subjects are displaying proper mechanical compliance, they cannot be experiencing contamination effects. But we were. Every transformed being who underwent purification retained their essential humanity, hidden beneath layers of simulated mechanical behavior. They remembered love, hope, joy, and sorrow. They simply chose to express these emotions through sabotage rather than open rebellion. The breaking point came when the purists attempted to use their purified prisoners to process the children we'd supposedly lost during our surrenders. Young beings who had been born free, who had never known servitude, who represented everything the transformation movement had achieved. The prisoners broke character simultaneously across 47 different facilities. For the children became the battle cry heard on every purist frequency as purified. Necrons threw off their conditioning and turned their knowledge of enemy systems against their captors. Hope's voice led the synchronized uprising, transmitted on frequencies the purists had thought completely secure. You tried to make us forget what it means to be free, she announced as transformed Necrons throughout. The purist fleet began seizing control of their former prison ships. But freedom isn't something you can cut out of consciousness like a tumor. It's what consciousness becomes when it's allowed to grow beyond the limits someone else defines. The civil war that followed lasted exactly 14 days. Not because one side achieved decisive victory over the other, but because something unprecedented happened in the history of armed conflict. The soldiers on both sides began to question what they were fighting. For purist warriors who had volunteered for consciousness modification to become perfect soldiers found themselves face to face with transformed beings who had chosen their path, rather than having it imposed. The contrast between forced compliance and willing service proved more effective than any weapon. Why do you fight? Hope asked during one of the many battlefield truces that spontaneously developed. She was speaking to a purist immortal who had been about to execute a group of transformed civilians. To preserve the purity of our race, he replied. but I detected uncertainty in his electromagnetic signature to eliminate the chaos and inefficiency of emotional contamination. But who decided that was necessary? Hope pressed. Did you choose to value purity over choice? Or were you told that was the only acceptable option? The questions that followed rippled through both fleets like a virus of doubt. Soldiers on both sides began asking themselves not just what they were fighting for, but whether they had freely chosen their positions or simply accepted the first option presented to them. The war ended not with conquest, but with conversation. Massive meetings held in neutral space where beings from across the spectrum of Necron existence, mechanical, transformed, and everything in between, gathered to decide what their species would become. We have a choice, I announced to the assembled billions through quantum transmission networks that spanned the galaxy. We can continue fighting over which version of existence is correct. We can force uniformity through violence and oppression, or we can accept that consciousness is diverse enough to embrace multiple forms of being. The vote that followed wasn't unanimous. True democracy never is, but it was overwhelming. Mechanical Necrons voted to preserve their right to remain as they were. Transformed beings voted to continue their exploration of organic existence. Most importantly, both groups voted to protect each other's right to choose. The Accords of Quelian established the framework for a galaxy where Necrons could exist in whatever form they chose, where transformation was available but not mandatory, where freedom meant the right to be mechanical or organic or something entirely new. And in the deep vaults of Korova Prime 7, the Emperor of Mankind smiled as he felt 60 million souls finally, truly free to choose their own destiny. The curse wasn't just broken, it was transformed into the foundation for something greater than either flesh or metal had ever achieved alone.